Well, in this episode, I'm going to talk about the real Sherman Jumbo M4A3E2 versus my replica, and just go over some of the effort that went into making this replica as accurate as possible. Still, there's a few features that are missing, so I'll point those out. And there are a few subtle features that would have cost a lot to duplicate. So I made a decision to sacrifice some accuracy in order to save some time and money. So I'll talk about those as well. So I made this accurate by finding some blueprints on a website, v-blueprints.com, and importing those into a 2D CAD program so I could draw all of the major hull and suspension and turret components in CAD, scaled at 60%, and then print those out and cut them out of plywood or whatever my materials were. So that's how I made it accurate. First, I'm going to talk about the turret. That seems to be the most common comment people have made, is that the turret doesn't look right. There's a lot of different turrets were used over the Sherman, and even within the Jumbo, there were only 254 Jumbos made, but even there they used two different companies to cast the turret. So here you can see those two turrets. They're laid upside down, so you can see the bottom contours a little better. But the Union Steel turret on the left has very rounded edges, and the OSF turret on the right has the very sharp creases where the different contours meet. So my Sherman replicates the OSF turret on the right. And here's another example of a turret where you can see the sharp creases both on the top edge and the bottom edge. In this picture, you can really see how the angle of the sides of the turret changes. Near the back of the turret, the sides of the turret are vertical. And as you go toward the front of the turret, it gradually transitions into a 12-degree slope. So in this video, you can see where those angles change on the turret. Here's looking at the same view, the vertical sides near the back and the 12-degree slope toward the front. Here is the commander's cupola from a real Sherman Jumbo. You can see in the hatch lid there's a rectangular slot. That is for a periscope, which my replica does not have. So the cupola itself doesn't rotate, but that section in the center of the hatch does rotate to allow that periscope to look in any direction. So here's my cupola. It does lack some details here and there, but you can see overall it's a very similar shape and design. So the top of the turret on my replica has the commander's cupola and a loader's hatch, and that's it. There are a lot of other small details that are missing. First, you have the periscope for the gunner. That has a unity sight and a by-6 sight on the real Sherman. My replica only has the telescopic sight that looks through the mantlet. There's also a periscope for the loader, so if you're counting, that's a total of 7 periscopes on the Sherman. There's a spotlight, and there's a 2-inch hole on the front corner for launching smoke grenades for concealment. You have a mount for the antenna, which I don't have, and then in the center there's a post to mount the 50 cal machine gun M2 Browning. That's the most visually obvious one, and CSR Productions is working on adding that to the Sherman now, I believe. Next thing, in the front center, you see a lifting lug, a lifting eye. There's also a lifting eye on either side, so I'm missing these 3 lifting eyes from my replica. And the last thing you see on the back of the turret in this picture, the 50 cal machine gun is in its transport storage location. So the barrel is detached and attached to those 2 brackets on the back of the turret, and there's a 3rd bracket in the center that's mounting the rest of the gun. In this picture, you can see those 3 brackets a little better and the lifting eye that's on the side of the turret. Next, we'll look at the gun and mantlet. Starting with the gun, the Sherman Jumbo had a 75mm rain gun, so if I scale that down to 60% and convert that to inches, that's 1.77 inches. And my replica gun is made out of a 2-inch PVC pipe, so the inside diameter is actually slightly bigger than the real gun, and it's very close on the end of the gun, but the real gun is tapered, so that's why where it meets the mantlet, it's a lot bigger diameter than in my replica. Now the real mantlet has a chamfer on the top and left and right corners, edges, which my replica doesn't have. So that makes it look like the gun sight hole is lower than it should be on my replica, but it's not. It's in the correct location. I just don't have that chamfer, so it makes it look farther away from the edge than it really is. The last thing my mantlet is missing is the two lifting eyes. You can see one in this picture on the side of the mantlet. So there's one on the other side, and my replica is missing these two lifting eyes. Now we'll look at the hull of the tank, starting at the front. Right in the center there, you see the travel lock, which is functional on my model. Then you have the bow machine gun, which is a 30 caliber Browning, and the cutout around that gun is unique to the Jumbo. This is because they increased the armor thickness by just taking a normal Sherman hull and adding a 1.5 inch thick plate over the top of it. So they had to make the cutout this shape in order to allow the full range of motion for the gun. And around the gun there's a lip for attaching a canvas cover for protecting the gun from sand and dirt. And toward the corners of the glacis plate you can see the two lifting eyes, which are also there on my replica. One thing missing from my replica is the two small triangular fenders on the corners. Now you may have noticed that both the real Sherman Jumbo on the right and my replica do not have lights or a horn. Now this is correct. So just to show you what I'm talking about, here's a Sherman which is not a Jumbo, and there are the headlights and the blackout marker lights and the horn. And as far as I know, the Jumbo is the only model of Sherman which did not have these features. So here's the front transmission cover, and the most obvious thing here is that the real one has a sort of a raised section in the middle. And in order to simplify that, I just made it one continuous radius all the way across the front, just to make it easier to make. Across the top, there are 17 bolts, so I have 17 bolts also in the same spacing. You can see they're not the same spacing all the way across. But on the real one, they're a little bit recessed. There's sort of a lip there to deflect bullets away from those bolt heads. And on the toe points, I just have one single eye on each side, and the real one had a real thick eye and a thinner eye next to it, and then attached to that is a step. That's what the driver and bow gunner would use to step up and climb up onto the front of the tank. Here's a good view of the driver's hatch. You can see the handle, and that's the little hinged cover for the periscope, and the guard over that. And at the top of the picture you can see the hinge, which is on a 35-degree angle, which is what allows that hatch to open. The mantlet is directly above part of the hatch, so it has to swing up and forward at the same time, so that's why that hinge is at an angle like that. In addition to the two periscopes mounted in the hatches, the driver and bow gunner both also had a fixed periscope mounted in the front of the hull, as you can see here. My replica does not have these periscopes. Another thing you can see in this picture is the ventilation cover for the air intake. I have a ventilation system, but it's not installed in this location on my replica. Now the hull for a Sherman Jumbo started out as a regular hull for an M4A3 large hatch Sherman. It was modified by adding an extra 1.5 inch thick plate over the glacis and an extra 1.5 inches over the sides. So here you can see some of the welding seams. They left a seam down the center of the hull, and you can see my replica also has this seam in the same location. And then the seam along the front corner there, I don't have the angled 2-inch wide weld that you can see in the replica. This would have been too difficult for me to try to duplicate, so I just have a sharp corner. And here's a close-up of what that weld looks like on the real Jumbo. This is a picture not only of a Sherman Jumbo, but it is the tank named Cobra King when they were just beginning the restoration process. But it shows a few features here. This is the rest for the engine doors, which you can see duplicated on my replica. And then you have the lifting eyes for transporting it onto a ship. And then on the back corner is a tail light. I don't have tail lights. I made a switch on the dash to operate the tail lights, but never got the tail lights made and installed. So those are missing. The last thing you can see really well in this picture is the splash guard that goes around the turret ring. It's just a small raised lip that prevents splash or incoming rounds from hitting directly on the turret ring, deflecting them up and away. And my replica does not have that splash guard. Here you can compare the engine doors. You can see the louver patterns are the same, and you can also see in this picture the engine or the fuel filler caps at the top of the picture, on the one on the left and one on the right, with the semicircular bullet shield. And you can see in the center of the real Sherman on the bottom, there is a filler and like a U-shaped bullet shield around that. That is for filling the engine cooling water. So my tank doesn't have that. I was going to add a filler for the water gun system. I drew a pencil mark on there where it's supposed to go, but never got around to installing that. And at the bottom of both pictures, you can see a small circular feature. That is the feature to store the wrench for tightening the track tension. So you can see I got that feature on my replica as well. And I do have the wrench, it's just not on there in this picture. On the back of the tank, on each end of that back plate, you can see some brackets. Those are for carrying spare track links, so they can hold 3 links on each side. So I'm missing those brackets. And then in my replica, in this picture, I've got the rear idler brackets removed, but you can see that otherwise the back of my replica is completely flat. So the real tank had a towing point in the center and 2 tie-down anchor points on the left and the right. And there was also a small engine door for accessing parts of the back of the engine. I do not have that door on my replica. In this picture, my replica, the doors are shut, but in the real tank on the top, you can see the engine doors, what they look like when they're open. So they're not just a flat door. They have a feature that goes down underneath so that if there's a blast above the engine deck, it directs that blast away from the engine to the sides of the inside of the hull. And here's a picture of the engine doors open on my tank. Not quite the same angle, but you get the idea. My replica is also missing the tanker's bar, the pioneering tools, and the tow cable, which are highlighted on this drawing. Here are the 2 engines side by side, which obviously look quite a bit different, but I thought it'd be fun to compare the specs. So on the left, you've got the Ford GAA V8, which displaced 1,100 cubic inches and produced 450 horsepower. The replica has a Briggs & Stratton engine with 21 cubic inches and producing 12.5 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much until you compare the power to weight ratio. The real jumbo weighed 42 tons, so that gives you a power to weight ratio of 10.7 horsepower per ton. My replica only weighs about 0.5 ton, that's an estimate, so that gives you a power to weight ratio of 25 horsepower per ton. So the replica has actually a power to weight ratio more than 2 times better than the real thing. Here is the drive sprocket I made when it was a pedal tank, and you can see the pattern very closely resembles the sprocket on the right side. However, I later learned that the Sherman Jumbo was not equipped with that sprocket originally. It had this one, which was a continuous circle on the inner diameter. So when I remade the sprockets for the belted track, I made them to match what the original Jumbo sprockets look like. However, with this design, the wheel is recessed instead of sort of flush with the inner surface of the sprocket. So I had an idea to build a sort of a false cover over the wheel, but I did not get around to doing that. But the sprocket is more true to the original Jumbo sprocket. On the right, you can see the real Jumbo used the rubber chevron track with these extended end connectors to increase the track width. In the middle is the first version of my track, where the end connectors are not quite the same size and shape, but they are spanning the gap in the track link. And then when I converted to a belt track on the picture on the left, you can see I moved the end connectors to the end of each track link. In the corner there is a picture of a vertical volute spring suspension system for the Sherman Jumbo. And here you can see my replica, which works much the same way. There was a balancing mechanism in the real tank that kept the same pressure on those 2 wheels. So if one wheel went up but the other went down by the same amount, it didn't compress the spring. It was only if both wheels were compressed that it would compress 2 volute springs inside that center housing. So mine had this same balancing principle, except instead of compressing a volute spring, it stretched a bungee cord. I ended up with a 17-foot long bungee cord wrapped 36 times around the two pins that would stretch that bungee cord, and that's what ended up giving it the right amount of support for the weight of the tank. The only thing not to scale here is these wheels should be about 12 inches in diameter to be the correct scale, and I ended up going with a 10-inch wheel simply for cost reasons. Those 10-inch wheels were only $4 a piece versus a 12-inch wheel I could only find for around $24 a piece, so it would have cost me $300 to buy a set of wheels. So I went with the cheaper wheel, giving up a little bit of the correct size. All right, let's look at the interior. Now, a real Sherman had a crew of 5. You had a driver and a bow machine gunner sitting down in the hull, and then in the turret you had a gunner, a loader, and a tank commander. So my replica has only a crew of 3. So first we'll look at the driver's position. On the top left you can see the driver's seat and a control panel and 2 steering levers which are close together in between his knees, and then the transmission is to the right. In that picture below you can see the control panel, the driver's seat, and the levers are off to the sides because the 2 transmissions are off to the side. In the top right picture you can see the 30 cal machine gun hanging down from the hull, so that's the hull machine gunner's position. And in the bottom right picture you can see where the ball mount is for the gun. The handle itself is missing in that picture, but you can see the driver has to operate as the bow machine gunner also. So here are the turret positions. The top picture, the front of the tank is up and to the right. So that chair kind of in the center is the gunner's seat, and directly behind him, that round seat, is the commander's seat. And you can see the gun breech and that shield that goes around it, that big white thing. That's a shield to guard against when the gun fires, that breech flies straight back, so it keeps everybody out of the way from getting hit by it. So that kind of splits the turret in half. And if you look through that guard, you can see another small round seat. That is the loader's seat on the other side. And then in the replica, the front of the tank is up and to the left. So that dark gray seat is sort of the gunner and commander. That role is combined. And then that light colored seat at the bottom of the picture is the loader's seat. Here you can just compare what the inside of the commander's cupola looks like. And here's the inside of the gun mantlet. And here you're looking straight up underneath the gunner's hatch. So you can see that aluminum housing is just where the periscope goes. There's not a periscope installed in that picture. And then in the bottom right, you can see my hatch with the periscope installed. Well, that concludes my detailed analysis of the accuracy of my Sherman Jumbo replica. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see this tank in action, go to CSR Productions 87. They're the new owners, and they're going to be putting it in some short films very soon.